Welcome to Justice Now, and this is part of the Workplace Mobbing, Part 22. And it's going to be about the Molson Coors shooting that happened about 2 days ago that I'm going to speak about. And I'm just going to speak about the shootings in general in the workplace. They may not all apply. However, there are just some additional information that you need to keep in mind, because certainly media is not going to tell you this. Certainly the company is not going to tell you this. And certainly the people involved, the perpetrators, are not going to own up in this magnitude and actually say that they've contributed to this scenario. For targets, when I was a target at least, and I'm sure that many targets can relate to, is there's different stages of the workplace mobbing. And you can attempt to catch it at the early stages. There's no guarantee that it will stop. But the one guarantee that's there is that it will continue and it will intensify. So there's no guarantee that it will stop, but there's a guarantee that it will continue and intensify. So the first stage is the name calling and belittling. And they put it's aggressive acts, but it's cloaked in jokes and taunts. And then depending on how you react, that determines on the perpetrators, because remember, the perpetrators have control over a lot of the situations as to how they're tormenting their targets. The targets only have control over themselves and their reactions. Although the targets may not see it at that particular time that they're getting tormented. So if you're able to stop it in the first stage, where it's perhaps one or two or three or a very small group, by confronting and saying, hey, this is not appropriate, I don't appreciate this, and you're putting down your boundaries, then that's great. It doesn't work all the time. Oftentimes it moves into stage 2, in which more people are triangulated. The perpetrators gets more people to join on board to taunt you. And those people who join on board, they're doing it out of peer pressure. It's been identified that someone's a target. They don't want to be a target, so they join in. Basically, cowardly reasons. For some, they enjoy tormenting others, so they join the group. They join the gang, right, in the tormenting of the individual. Hopefully, HR or your supervisor can get involved. And if your supervisor is willing to engage and say, this is inappropriate, that will help. I know that in my situation, where there was the drop downs, I would be moving to different places because the perpetrators would follow where I would be, spy on who I'm speaking with, and then turn them against me, right? Spoke to the supervisor about this, and because one of the things that the perpetrators were talking about is the fact that I'm moving seats. It's a drop-down policy. It's not as if they don't know that there's a drop-down policy for the desks. And it was brought up at a team meeting, that anyone can sit anywhere where there is a designated drop-down. And that stopped it for a little bit, but then they did continue a few months later, by getting other people who've been triangulated into their fold to do the same type of torment. So that's an example. But so that's stage 2. Stage 3, manager has to get involved. manager is recognizing there's something amiss in the environment, but rather than actually doing an actual investigation, they take on the perception that so many people cannot be wrong about one person, right? So you're caught in a catch-22 at that point. If the supervisor is supportive and has been able to catch some of the things going on, then that's a plus. But guaranteed majority of the times, that's not going to be the case. And if you've gone to stage 3, in fact, I'd say even from stage 2, you should be looking for a job. You should be working on your exit plan at that point, because it's highly unlikely that you would be getting a transfer. It does happen, but it's very, very few. You can always look towards the Workplace Bullying Institute to find out the statistics on that. There is an 87% failure rate for targets trying to stop this type of thing within the work environment. So it continues to intensify. The perpetrators are actively sabotaging, name-calling, taunting, and they're not doing this. Sometimes they're doing this out in the open if they want to get the attention of and admiration of their other colleagues. But a lot of this is done under radar. So you're documenting everything that's happening, but no one particular incident is going to, highlight who the perpetrators are, what they're doing, because by that time there are so many people that are involved. And again, there's going to be many people that you haven't even worked closely. There's many people that's not even on your team, or there's people that you've formally collaborated with, or you thought you were amicable with, or that you've assisted help with getting a promotion, and they're turning against you. So then after stage 4, most targets are fed up. They're in a emotional state. They're in a state of paranoia because there's constant threats. And keep in mind, just because a person's in a state of paranoia doesn't mean that what's going on around them is not true, right? They're under constant threat, so your livelihood is threatened. Your ability to feed your family is under threat. The ability to continue the lifestyle, your mortgage or your rent, continue car payments, all of that is under threat. If you have benefits, your medical benefits, and you're having medical condition and you need medication or you need a surgery and it's covered, those are under threat, right? So they threaten you constantly. I know that in the work environment that I left, I was threatened constantly. And the threats are not always verbal. The threats are nonverbal as well, where they invade your space. They also invade the space of your property. So for instance, there's been times where there's been times where the perpetrators would say to each other, "Oh, I can always bust out those tires." She wouldn't even know. And she was a code word for me. So during the lunch times, I would go and check on the car just to see if everything was okay, to see if anyone was parked too closely to the car, so that when they opened the door, if they would create a dent and create some damage to my car. And sometimes the torment from these perpetrators are even outside of the workplace. There was a particular route that I would travel each time, and I would notice that a couple of the tormentors were taking those routes as well. And then they would ask me, "Oh, I noticed you took this route. I noticed you took that route." That creates, and this was done over and over. That creates a sense of paranoia. Am I being followed? Why am I being followed? Why are you doing this? You know what I mean? But again, they're not, the whole purpose of this, and I'm not an expert on this because I don't go around perpetrating people like this, but I can only assume that it's to create that paranoia, to create that you don't have control over anything, and we can do what we will, whatever way we can, to destroy your life in any way we can, right? So then you go into stage 4. The targets attempt to speak to HR about the situation. HR, for the most part, is to defend the company or the organization. And they're there to defend and protect the brand. So the company or organization will then be looking at, okay, will this allegation hurt our brand? And rather than take your situation into consideration, they're looking at ways of how to protect their brand. So that's another way that the perpetrators are also protected, is the fact that the HR is always going to look at protecting the company brand. It's not always the case, but majority of the time that is the case. So they'll go through, I call it theater. They go through the theater of doing an investigation, and then lo and behold, nothing comes up. And the theater would be, they call in the perpetrators an interview, they call in the perpetrators' supporters an interview. Of course they're going to deny it. Of course there's going to be way more people against one you, right? So then how do they look at how to solve the issue? Get rid of you, right? Because then they turn around and say, then you're the problem. The perpetrators, again, will be amped up meaning that they will have more energy again to continue to attack you. And then they sabotage even more to make it seem as if you are not the right fit for the job. They've been doing this all this time, but they've amped it up even more. You know, there's no telling what these perpetrators will do. And then the fifth and final one, stage of workplace mobbing, is that in a embarrassing and humiliating way, after you've gone through all the trauma, you get fired. Some get transferred, and it doesn't mean that when you get transferred out of the environment that you're safe. You just get further traumatized because those same perpetrators will just go and speak to the ones that are in the place that you've been transferred to continue the torment. Most end up having to leave the company. But if you stay, then they find ways to fire you. Because at that point, your mind is so absorbed in the paranoia that they've created. It's so absorbed in the trauma, and you have this strong sense of justice, and you want to make things right. You want to make sure that the people who have been tormenting you pay for their actions. Because in most cases, in virtually all the cases, they don't get fired for what they do. It's very, very rare, but in most cases they don't get fired, right? So it's not the perfect crime per se, but it's the type of situation where they do not get tormented. They don't get things back to them. They don't get their karma. Oftentimes they get promoted. Oftentimes they're protected because ultimately the company brand is being protected. I'll give you a part 2.